controlled the map, controlled the allocation of resources, built a bench of people in the judiciary and the political environment who, when things worked for their favor and they began to control the national conversation, they had those people in place, ready to go to implement their agenda. And it didn't really matter, in my estimation, whether the candidates that they supported were science deniers, suppressors of civil rights, homophobes, whatever you might want to call it. If they could check the box on the two things that were important, they passed and they got in. We are not on the climate side and the more progressive side of the political agenda. We do not compete effectively with that sense of direction and organization. And until we replace our approach around and coalesce around this issue as the issue that's a threshold on whether you're going to support somebody or not, you're not going to have the people in the positions of power who are necessary to change this conversation from what we're doing now. We all sit around and say, oh, we can't believe that Clean Air Act is being gutted. Oh, we can't believe the Clean Water Act is being gutted. We live in a bubble in this state. We live in a bubble that doesn't give us a full understanding of the power of these other forces. And we have not flipped that equation around to our own benefit. I'll take it to Mashpee, right? We do not, somebody mentioned, Julian did, go to your Board of Selectmen and say, well, what are your 5 priorities, and climate has to be one of them. We don't talk about climate. We've never had one single conversation about climate. We talk about things that are about climate without realizing that they're in this context. When everybody complains about the need to do more dredging, they're really talking about climate. When they talk about those roads are flooding, or we had this big storm and washed out, they're talking about climate, but they don't realize it, they don't get it, they don't understand it. So my board never talks about it. We would never have a conversation about it. And if you put them under, if they had the guts to actually admit it, most of them would say they don't believe in it anyway. So what are you talking about? In town meeting Monday night, easy one, styrofoam ban. It's polyethylene or whatever the chemical. But so we lost that one, and you could see it coming a mile away because the local ice cream guy got up and spent the weekend on Facebook and spent the day of town meeting talking to people about how really important it is to be able to keep his ice cream cold. And it's just ice cream cups, and what difference does it really make? And the environmental community, it's a climate issue, right? I mean, who needs, you don't need styrofoam, it's a petroleum product. The fact that it would have added a nickel to the cost of the ice cream was the thing that changed the conversation. We can't hurt local business, and we can't add cost. And no one thinks about what the overall societal cost of producing that styrofoam cup was. And nobody on my board, other than me, argued the point. Okay? And we lost. And we knew it was coming. As a group of environmental community, we had 3 or 4 days notice, and we said, you got to get organized, we got to be prepared to speak about this. One other person got up and gave a coherent argument that was based in the larger context of this conversation. So, your job after today, if you want to, in my opinion, make anything happen out of this conversation, is you need to start to think about who you're electing at the local level, right? You can't, we're kind of stuck with what we got right now, nationally. And maybe it'll change and maybe it won't. Frankly, I'm not all that optimistic at my core that it will change. But we can spend these years in purgatory putting people on boards of selectmen, on county commissioners. Our legislators, they're pretty good. But who's the next generation of legislators going to be? It's going to be some schmo that you elect to a board of selectmen, right? So start to think about who those people are. Make that the basis of your decision. Go to the candidates forums and ask them. Nobody asks any of us about these things. So if nobody's asking us about it, they're not going to make it a priority. You need to make the cost of not paying attention and prioritizing this issue to be more painful than the perceived cost of dealing with it. Until and unless that happens, and it happens at an individual granular basis, we're not going to get the kind of change that we need.
This section of the program is a call to action. So that is what you just heard, and I know that for some people, we may be walking the line, but that intersection between morality and faith and spirituality, and the tool, as I said before, that we have to actually make change, which is our democracy. You're hearing from people who are really embedded in that or have been embedded in that, and you're hearing a call for action. A call for action. Next, we have Chris Powicki. Chris is a good friend, has been involved in environmental and energy issues here on Cape Cod for decades and decades and decades. Chris, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks to the Faith Community Environmental Network, to where we are today, and to Woods Hole Research Center for sponsoring this event. I just want to say, can somebody please take a picture of me so I can send it to my mom? I don't know if this is what she dreamed of, but it could be out there. Thank you, Dan. So I'm here today as a member of Cape Cod 350, which is a local environmental advocacy organization, and also as a representative of the Sierra Club. I serve on the state chapter's executive committee, as well as the executive committee of the local Cape Cod group. And what I like about these two environmental organizations is that they are connected to action at all levels. 350 is part of a global movement started by Bill McKibben. What does 350 mean? That is what many scientists say is the appropriate level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the safe level. Right now we're about 415, so we put 350 in the mirror a long time ago. You heard why we need to take action. And then the Sierra Club is active at the national level, at the state level, and at the local level. And I think that that's really important to have that ability to be connected to a larger movement. I've been working on climate change and energy issues locally for about 20 years, not decades and decades, close, Dan. Sometimes it feels like decades and decades. But I would say that this region has made quite a bit of progress. When you drive around, you see all kinds of solar systems, not just on homes, but on transfer stations and on commercial buildings. And there's clean vehicles everywhere. 15 years ago, these systems numbered in the dozens. Now they're in the hundreds to thousands. So we have come a long way. But as we've heard today, change is not happening fast enough. Now, I think the most important thing is political action to cut greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as possible. Last month, at the Global Climate Strike event in Barnstable Village, about 150 people assembled to demand action by the Cape Cod Commission. Our student speakers are the ones who said the most important things. These intelligent and angry, righteously angry, young women said that they, future generations, will suffer the most, more so than today's voters. And these students cannot even vote yet. They said that the time for individual environmentalism is over, that they were told that recycling and picking up litter and using refillable water bottles was going to save the earth. They know that's not enough, and they called for a revolt in order to save their future before our continued inaction steals it from them. In just a few short sentences, these students identified the ethical and moral failures underlying our climate crisis, and also the need for a political revolution to achieve the systemic change that's required. Now, of course, that's not going to be easy to unseat the corporate interests that control our political system, and also to convince or replace the officials who don't feel the urgency that you feel and that many others feel. At the federal level, Sierra and 350 support the Green New Deal. But let's be honest, we also support carbon pricing. There's not going to be a lot of action in those two areas under the present administration. The focus really nationally has to be on stopping the damage. At the state level, Julian provided a great summary. I'm not going to reiterate, but I am going to urge those of you who live on the Outer Cape to give Representative Sarah Peak's office a call and tell them how concerned you are about climate change, and tell her that you're glad she supports all these bills and that you would like her to fight from her position in leadership to ensure that Speaker DeLeo gives these bills their due consideration. The Senate in the last session passed a visionary bill. If we could get that bill passed out of the House this time, we would be a long way toward meeting some of the challenges that have been discussed today. On the Cape, we have an opportunity to take nonpartisan action. And I think it's important to look at the regional institutions that are unique here on our little peninsula. The Cape Cod Commission and the Cape Light Compact. We have a great opportunity for these organizations to do more, but we need to demand more from them. 350 and Sierra have been working a lot on the Cape Cod Commission, trying to change and update and amend the regional policy plan to make sure that this region's growth and development policy aligns with the state's goals and international goals of cutting greenhouse gas emissions dramatically. We're calling for amendments that promote zero net energy buildings, 100% renewable energy, solar-ready construction, crazy things like tree planting. We've gotten some resistance, but also there's a lot of apathy out there. And so I would encourage you to contact your town, your select board, and tell them you would like to see their appointee, your town's appointee to the Cape Cod Commission, to take action on the amendments that were put before them and to take action to address, through climate change or through the regional policy plan, the urgent action that's needed. And I also think it's important for us to expect more from our local officials and from environmental organizations. Organizations like APCC, like the Cape Cod Climate Change Collaborative, like Lower Cape Individual, like the Faith Communities Environmental Network, should be encouraging, and I'm going to use the should word, should be encouraging their constituencies to advocate for change at the regional level, to push the Cape Cod Commission and also the Cape Light Compact to invest in more local renewable energy. And I'll just close with an example that we can all be inspired by. Across the Cape, over the last year, one individual started a movement to effect a ban on municipal purchase and sale of bottled water. Just municipal purchase and sale. 5 or 6 towns adopted that policy this spring. Several others are on the verge of adopting that policy this fall. We are seeing local communities take action at the urging of an individual citizen who motivated individuals to join in her cause. And there is now a movement across the Cape that could position this entire region as one that rejects plastic bottles for water, for soda, and for other purposes. This is the kind of dramatic, systemic change we need. We look to that example, encourage you to go to your towns and fight for and ask for change, and also to have your own ideas for change and connect with organizations like 350 Cape Cod and the Sierra Club, who will help you along the way. Thank you.
What a great lineup. Next is Montana Bailey from Nauset Regional. Our 3 daughters all graduated from Nauset Regional High. It's an amazing school. Full disclosure, I actually wrote a little note to Montana during the other presentations, and I said, "Are you angry?" And she wrote back, "No, not angry, but concerned." And so, just as a lead-in, you know, we hear a lot about sort of the generational warfare of this, like the blame of our generation against your generation. And I loved what Mary Evelyn said about the cross-generational handshake. There were those of us a generation ago who got this. We started Earth Day. We worked to clean up the Great Lakes and a lot of the rivers around the country, some of which you could throw a match on and it would explode. Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. This is not a generational issue, folks. This is a status quo issue. There are people who are benefiting from the way things are and who are effectively resisting change. And those are the people that we need to take on. I say this because I don't want her to give me a kick as she's walking by me. Obviously, some of it is generational, But the inspirational leadership of Montana and her classmates is just so cool. And so I introduce Montana.
Thank you for all being here today. By sitting here, you are taking one more step, one more stand, and one more movement towards fighting climate change. My name is Montana Bailey, and I consider myself to be an environmental activist, doing what I can to untie the knotted mess that is crippling our home. At Nauset, we have a growing culture that fosters environmental advocacy. In the Green Club, we have completely revolutionized our recycling facilities, educating students on how to divide their waste in a sustainable manner. We are also currently working on a project where we sell students secondhand clothes on our online thrift store in order to not only direct the proceeds to getting metal silverware in our cafeteria, but informing students on the growing textile pollution epidemic. In the Youth Against Plastic Pollution Club, we are hand-building clay mugs that individuals can take to coffee shops and fill instead of receiving plastic cups, while simultaneously donating our proceeds to the Center for Coastal Studies and their marine debris research. The Human Rights Academy is spreading the word of human destruction of our planet through the strong vocations of activism. We, as a student body, are growing more environmentally conscious. However, the more and more I personally get involved in matters concerning the preservation of our planet, the more I realize the lack of action and laziness surrounding it. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm pretty lazy, but I promise there are small things that if we all adjusted in our daily routine would have a drastic impact on the protection of our environment. Whether it is saying no to a straw, picking up a piece of trash on your beach walk, turning your lights off when you leave the house, even just bringing your own bag to the supermarket. These things still have an effect. The culture of our nation is single use. These small adjustments alone are not what is going to change our current environmental state. Our values need to change. We need to value our planet, what it provides us, rather than convenience and luxury. We as students are rising. We are dealing with the trashed planet that has been given to us. We need change. What will you do? Thank you.
One thing I will do, instead of like declaring war on that generation and feeling blamed, I will follow that generation. Those of us in our 50s, 60s, 70s, unlike what many of our parents did when we were activists in our youth, have the opportunity to follow this leadership and get behind and kick ass with them. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's write some questions if you have them, or even better if you want to stand up. We're running low on time, but we do have about almost 10 or 15 minutes to ask this panel questions. So Brian is going to come down the aisle and with a microphone, and if you have any questions, shout it out.
My name is Claire McClarty. I live in Harwich. I have 5 kids. Next generation. I have 2 questions here. One is, considering the situation, can we please stop development on Cape Cod? The overbuilding is unabated, and it makes sustainability more and more an impossible goal. My other question is, I believe, even with solar, wind, electric cars, and all the new technologies that are invented and even dreamed of, we still need to drastically alter our lifestyles to meet the climate goals. And I feel that this is being glossed over. No one's being upfront about it. The necessities are beyond what any of us would consider comfortable. Could anyone speak more to this? Using way less power, way less travel. We need wastewater innovation. Sewers are not ecologically helpful. Even though they do reduce nitrogen in the water, sewers are a huge carbon footprint, waste of energy. bad way for the Cape to clean up. Changing our diets. I'm really interested in growing food, local agriculture, those kind of things. Does anyone have facts and data to give us about that stuff?
So the first question was about development, and is there a way to stop it, slow it, or do it smarter on Cape Cod? And I think the second really was about conservation of energy and electricity. Instead of just looking ways to create more through sustainable methods, but how do we get around conserving it? Is that a good summary? Okay.
On the development question, I'm sorry. On the development question, I would say, you know, there's a couple of different ways to approach it. Having your town take some action to identify and protect additional open spaces. I think the best way to protect land and defeat, you know, development proposals is to acquire the property, take it out of the circulation. And that can be done, and, you know, a lot of towns have done a lot of good work on protecting open spaces, and it's reflected in the high quality drinking water that we still have on the Cape. The reality of it is, and this just kind of connects back to your second part of your question, the vast majority of the buildings, the development, and the associated economic activity, transportation, wastewater generation that's going to happen on the Cape is going to happen from what's already here. The increment that's left to be developed is relatively small compared to that which has already been developed. So it really speaks to, you know, what are we going to do in terms of dealing with the energy footprint of the homes that we currently have, the choices we make about transportation. And I would argue that, you know, there's a lot more to be had to make progress on those areas than to say we're not going to do anything anywhere else. Because even if you stopped all development now, we'd still have an enormous problem. You know, on the water side, we still have, you know, heavily impacted water resources from poor choices that we've made on wastewater management. We still have bad traffic because of the nature of development decisions that have preceded us and the kind of sprawl that gives out. So from my perspective, the thing we should be focusing on perhaps a little bit more is, you know, what are the right choices for towns to make to deal with wastewater management? There are options. There's got to be some sewering. It's not the only thing, but it is part of the equation. There are choices that can be made about how you sewer, where you sewer, how you treat that wastewater, how you take advantage of, through anaerobic digestion, like the heat and potential power generation that are generated from that require some more density in village areas that address a lot of other places. So it's really not just a matter of saying no, but it's looking at what we're doing and trying to find, and there are creative ways, and there are good examples out there of doing it smarter and differently, rather than getting into the fight about the last increment.
Thank you for your question. The reason that 350 Cape Cod and Sierra Club's Cape Cod group are targeting the regional policy plan is because that sets the growth and development policy for this entire region. And the amendments we put forward amend the growth and development policy with the words that all of this growth and development must occur consistent with the state's and larger efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If the Cape Cod Commission has that as part of the regional policy plan, then the developments that it looks at will essentially have to be net zero. And if the towns develop local comprehensive plans that are consistent with the regional policy plan, then the towns will move in that same direction. So we really need to look at the policy solutions we have available to manage our growth and development, and perhaps ask the Cape Cod Commission to change its perspective a little bit. The second question about how are we going to get there? I think it is really important, again, to look at the institutions we have, and the Cape Light Compact provides a perfect example. Every single person should get that energy audit done, and then they should probably get it done again. I'm on my maybe 4th or 5th or 6th time. Of course, we have a house that was built in 1700, so we had a long way to go. But I also think it would be fantastic if the towns, which make up the Cape Light Compact, really pushed and advertised this each individually and try to get every single resident and every single business in their town to sign up for the energy audit. If we had 100% compliance on energy audits that we all pay for on our energy bill, we're going to see a huge reduction in our energy consumption and thus our greenhouse gas footprint from the development that's here. And Andy is right, the development that is here is the biggest problem. We need to figure out how to address that.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Thank you. My name is Jane Thompson, and I live in Harwich since 2013. My concern, I have a lot of them, but I'll address just this one. If I drive the speed limit, I can look behind me and probably see a line of about 15 cars. Every day, the speeding, the speed at which cars, oversized vehicles are being driven is just outrageous. There's no control over it. So if you look at automobiles, any kind of vehicle like this, the carbon dioxide they're producing is tremendous. I was told by someone in Harwich, oh, speeding cars don't emit more, use more fuel. Well, I think they do, and they do damage to our roads. And I feel day in and day out, it's dangerous for me to drive the roads on the Cape.
Okay, I'm going to turn that into a question. Are there any law enforcement officers here? Okay, no, thank you for that. That's important. What behind you, Brian?
Abby Summerskill, East Orleans. Can any of you tell all of us what the status is for National Grid transferring to renewable resources for generating the power that we would then use for our electric cars, if we get them?
So does
If we
anybody
can
on the
get
panel-
them.
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned, we have made great progress here locally with solar power, and that's not just on Cape Cod, it's throughout Massachusetts and across the country. Same thing with wind energy. We now rely on renewable generation, wind and solar, for a growing percentage of our renewable energy needs. To get to higher penetrations of renewable energy, we are going to have to modernize our grid or move to a much different model of where our energy comes from. Replacing large power plants with small solar systems is essentially impossible the way our grid currently operates. And also, we lack the capability to store the energy to provide it overnight or when the wind stops blowing. Our grid is going to transform when we have large offshore wind projects built, like Vineyard Wind. That project alone would generate more energy than is needed in this region and would end up with this region being a net exporter of green energy to the rest of the Massachusetts. But to go to higher percentages of renewable energy, we're going to need more battery energy storage and other forms of energy storage that can hold energy for longer duration, perhaps seasonally. And we also have to have a modernized grid that is much more digital and interactive and responsive to what consumers are doing and what distributed generation is doing. We're changing out where we get our energy from, where we're getting our energy from. We're actively changing that out right now. We're starting to see projects on the Cape with a battery installation in Provincetown and batteries on the Vineyard and also on Nantucket, where we're going to start to have the storage that's needed to stabilize the grid going into the future. But this is going to be a long-term effort, and we only have 10 years. We're going to have to demand that our regulators push utilities to make the investments in energy-efficient grid control technologies, and also that we empower consumers to take action consistent with the needs of the larger grid.
Thank you. But before we're going to have to wrap it up. Before I hand it back to Brian to wrap it up, though, who here would like us to do another one of these? I'm going to pass to Brian when he talks whether we'll commit to that. But in closing, let me just say a couple of personal things. First of all, I'm committing, along with my wife Heidi, in the next year We're doing solar. We're in the middle of that project now on our home to be an exporter from our little house. And I'm going to be getting an electric vehicle. So those are two things I'm doing. There was a question in here about air transportation. Air transportation right now contributes about between 2 and 2.5% of global greenhouse gases. So it's not the biggest contributor, but 2 to 2.5% is a big number. We had pledged at Cape Air that we're going to be the first all-electric airplane used in scheduled air service. We're going to continue to work on that. And my last remark is going to be this, because this is a call for action, even though it may seem like a negative one. 40 years ago next week, I and a group of about 300 people were arrested performing nonviolent civil disobedience at the entrance to Wall Street in New York City on the issue of economic justice and wealth and income inequality. At that point, and that was the 50th anniversary of Black Monday, that was the date we chose. We are now closing in on the 90th anniversary, okay, 40 years ago was the 50th, and the wealth and income gap is much worse than it was when we did that action 40 years ago. So what I'm going to say is, we all got to really, as I think, who was it who said it has to be our primary issue? I think it was you, Andrew. This has to be our primary issue. It's existential. It's our generational responsibility, and we have to be committed to it. And don't rule out things like nonviolent civil disobedience. It was done around the abolitionist issue. It was done around the suffragette issue. It's been done around environmental issues. It is not a bad thing to express yourself sometimes in the only avenue you have, which is to put your own personal skin in the game. And that may sound extreme to some people here, but having done it, here I am. Okay, wasn't that extreme? So Brian, I want to thank you.
I usually get the last word in this room, but I want to thank you, a word of gratitude to all of you. A couple questions ago, the question and the statement touched upon, I think, materialism and consumerism. You know, some things that many of our religious tradition espouse are self-sacrificial love and compassion. That includes compassion and self-sacrificial love for each other and for Mother Nature, too. We have to assume a different lifestyle. We have to have the humility to give up some of the tastes that we have acquired. We have to develop a respect and reverence for nature like we haven't had in the past. So this is a call for transformation of the way we approach the world, look at the world, and see the world and act upon the world. And those are interior movements. But if we can do that and live a simple life like Quakers do, those values will get us to the points we need to go. I want to thank our moderator, I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank our speakers, and I want to thank each and every one of you. And a special thanks to Bridget Raynaud, who planned all that. She's right over there. And to Sheila Place. Lastly, we have cookies in the parish hall, but more importantly, there's informational tables. Please go and sign up for something. Take care, and thank you for being here.